Most people do not stay broke because they earn too little. They stay broke because the engine under their life is built to burn cash faster than cash can become freedom. You can double the fuel and still go nowhere if the machine itself is wrong. A weak engine does not become a freedom engine when you pour more income into it. It becomes a louder trap. I have spent my life studying capital allocation, and the longer I do this, the less impressed I am by income on its own. Income is just fuel. What matters is what your machine does with it after it arrives. That is where most people fail. They think the battle is about making more money. Sometimes it is. Most of the time it is about whether the machine under their habits is designed to convert earnings into ownership, or to convert earnings into stress, image, and temporary relief. You do not need a miracle. You need a machine that obeys you. I want to give you a very simple way to think about it. Every dollar that enters your life should flow through 3 chambers of one engine. The first chamber is the burn chamber. That is where life happens. Housing, food, utilities, transportation, clothes, entertainment, convenience, status, impulse, all of it. The second chamber is the shock absorber. That is the money that keeps one bad week from turning into one bad decade. The third chamber is the ownership cylinder. That is where your future gets built. That is the chamber that quietly buys back your time. If those 3 chambers are not controlled, then your income is not working for you. It is working against you. Most people let the first chamber eat everything, then they call the result bad luck. I call it engine failure. The first rule is brutally simple. Your lifestyle can consume no more than 75% of what you earn. Less is better. More is dangerous. Notice what I did not say. I did not say you should feel guilty every time you buy coffee. I did not say wealth is built by becoming a joyless machine that never spends a dollar. That is childish thinking. The issue is not whether you spend, the issue is whether spending is governing the machine or serving the machine. A $5 coffee will not ruin your life. A life built on oversized housing, oversized car payments, oversized convenience, oversized identity costs, and constant applause spending will ruin it very efficiently. People love to argue over tiny purchases because tiny purchases are emotionally easy to discuss. A coffee is easier to debate than a truck payment. Streaming subscriptions are easier to debate than a luxury apartment chosen to impress people who do not pay your bills. Small talk about money is usually camouflage for larger cowardice. I would rather see you buy the coffee you truly value and refuse the giant purchase that chains you to 10 more years of obedience. That is what rational spending looks like. Most people misunderstand frugality. Frugality is not the worship of cheapness. It is the refusal to pay full price for ego. The wealthy people I have known over a lifetime are often not visibly extravagant in the way ordinary people imagine. They do not always chase the premium label. They ask what something is worth to them, not what it signals to the room. That is a completely different operating instinct. An ordinary ear hears, "Can I afford it?" A strategic ear hears, "What does this do to my machine?" That one question changes almost everything. Suppose something costs you money, but it produces genuine energy, real usefulness, meaningful productivity, or steady emotional relief at a reasonable scale. Fine, that may be worth it. Money is a tool, not a religion. But most expensive things do not improve your machine. They decorate your cage. A bigger car can become an image tax. A bigger home can become a maintenance tax. A premium zip code can become a performance tax if it forces you to take work you hate just to maintain the address. A lifestyle built to be seen will quietly convert your income into obligation. I want you to see the pattern. Every spending decision is either cooling the engine, stabilizing the engine, or overheating the engine. That is why 75% is such a useful ceiling. It forces discipline without demanding perfection. It gives you room to live, but it does not give your appetite permission to run the company. And appetite is a terrible chief executive. Once people cross a certain income line, they often assume they have escaped danger. Usually they have only upgraded danger. The apartment is nicer. The payments are larger. The emotional expectations are heavier. The social comparison is fiercer. The fixed costs are now dressed in designer clothes. That is not freedom. That is a polished treadmill. The first chamber must be controlled because uncontrolled burn rate destroys every other good intention. You cannot build wealth on top of chronic overheating. I have seen people earning handsome salaries who are effectively poor because every dollar already has a master. Rent has a claim, debt has a claim, the car has a claim, image has a claim, convenience has a claim, weekend escape has a claim. Exhaustion has a claim. By the time the paycheck arrives, it is not income. It is a hostage exchange. That is why I tell you to think in terms of a burn rate ceiling, not in terms of random sacrifice. If you spend 75%, that means 25% remains available for protection and ownership. If you can spend 65%, even better. If you can spend 60%, now you are no longer merely living. You are acquiring thrust. But to spend less than 75%, you have to become honest about value, not sticker price value. Some purchases are not the enemy. Waste is the enemy. Friction is the enemy. Identity spending is the enemy. Automatic upgrades are the enemy. A cheap shirt worn for years may be high value. A luxury outfit worn twice to maintain some temporary social fiction may be low value. A modest apartment close to your work may be high value if it buys back hours of life. A large house with a punishing commute may be low value if it devours energy, time, and sanity. A dollar cannot be judged by category alone. It has to be judged by what it does to the machine. That judgment requires maturity. Most people never make it. They remain trapped in the false contest between being good with money and enjoying life, as if the only options are monk or fool. The adult game is different. The adult game is deciding which spending creates real utility and which spending weakens your refusal power. Refusal power is one of the most valuable forms of wealth in the world. It is your ability to say no to a stupid boss, a predatory deal, an exhausting client, a desperate move, a manipulative partner, a bad relocation, a panic decision. You do not buy refusal power with income alone. You buy it with low burn rate and stored strength. That brings me to the second chamber of the engine, the shock absorber for every dollar that comes into your life. At least 10% should be directed toward a cushion fund until that cushion reaches roughly 5 months of essential expenses. Why 5 months? Because life does not wait for your spreadsheet to become convenient. Cars break, jobs end, roofs leak, bodies get injured, markets freeze, family obligations arrive. A single event can push a person with no reserves into debt, panic, and weak decisions. Once weak decisions begin, the damage multiplies. People think emergencies are expensive because of the original event. Often the real cost comes from what panic forces you to do next. Without a cushion fund, every emergency becomes a negotiation with interest rates, shame, and urgency. That is a terrible bargaining position. The cushion fund is not glamorous. It will not get applause at dinner. It will not make you look brilliant. It will not give you cocktail party stories. It will do something more valuable. It will keep chaos from buying equity in your life. I want you to understand the psychology here. A reserve does more than protect money. It protects judgment. When you know you can absorb a hit, your nervous system changes. You think more clearly. You say no faster. You do not mistake urgency for importance. You do not sign bad loans just to stop the pain. The cushion fund is financial oxygen. A lot of people have never felt what it is like to breathe financially. They have only felt survival. They think stress is normal. They think checking the bank balance with a knot in the stomach is adulthood. It is not adulthood. It is fragility. Fragility is expensive. A person without reserves is always one disruption away from becoming a customer of desperation. And desperation is where the worst products in society make their money. Late fees, overdraft fees, payday loans, high-interest credit cards, rushed car repairs on borrowed money, bad financing on furniture. Predatory installment plans, all of them feed on the absence of a shock absorber. That is why the 10% reserve rule matters so much. It is not just about saving. It is about stopping the system from charging you the fragility tax. Now let me sharpen the rule. This reserve is not for vacations. It is not for random splurges. It is not for the emotional lie that everything stressful counts as an emergency. An emergency is not boredom. It is not restaurant fatigue. It is not concert envy. It is not the annual sale event that somehow appears every month. An emergency is when something breaks the structure of ordinary life and your options narrow quickly. That is what the fund is for. If your essential monthly expenses are $2,000, 5 months means $10,000. If they are $4,000, it means $20,000. This is not mystical. It is arithmetic. But the arithmetic matters because arithmetic can be obeyed. If you do not know your true essential monthly number, then you do not know how fragile you are. You are operating blind. Most people say they want control. Very few want the math that produces control. Get the math anyway, then store that reserve intelligently. not in a checking account that pays you nothing while inflation chews on the cash, not in speculative assets that can drop right when you need the money, not in some fashionable gamble disguised as innovation. A cushion fund belongs where it stays liquid, stable, and useful. That is why a high-yield savings account makes sense for many people. Not because it is exciting, because it respects the job the money is supposed to do. Every dollar has a job. Confused people assign no jobs. Strategic people assign exact jobs. A reserve dollar is not an investment dollar. It is a stability dollar. If you make a stability dollar perform the work of a growth dollar, you create unnecessary risk. If you make a growth dollar sit forever in cash after your reserve is already full, you create unnecessary stagnation. This is where many people go wrong. They save and save and save because saving feels safe, but past a certain point, excessive saving in low-growth containers is just fear wearing a responsible costume. Once your cushion fund is fully built, the role of that 10% changes. The machine does not stop. The direction changes. The reserve chamber does not need endless fuel. It needs enough fuel. After that, additional fuel should be directed toward ownership. That brings us to the third chamber, the ownership cylinder. At least 15% of every dollar you earn should be directed toward assets that can outwork you over time more. If you can manage it, much more if your burn rate is under control and your reserve is established. This is where ordinary life separates into two tribes. The worker tribe believes money comes from labor, and therefore all improvement is expected to come from more labor. The owner tribe understands that labor may start the process, but assets finish it. The worker says, "How do I make more this month?" The owner says, "How do I build something that still pays when I am sleeping, thinking, resting, healing, or saying no?" That is not laziness. That is civilization. A society that only knows how to earn through effort becomes permanently exhausted. A person who only knows how to earn through labor becomes permanently dependent on continuous output. That is a fragile life. If you stop working and the machine stops producing entirely, then you do not own an engine. You own a treadmill. School teaches most people how to become better labor. It rarely teaches them how to become better owners. That is why so many people with high incomes still feel terrified. They know somewhere deep down that if the labor stops, the whole machine shudders. Ownership changes the equation. A Roth IRA matters because it gives you a chamber where future gains can compound without future tax on qualified withdrawals. That is not a minor detail. Taxes are one of the most relentless leaks in any financial machine. Legal structures that reduce future tax drag matter. A 401k matters because it gives you tax advantages and, in many cases, employer matching. When an employer offers a match and you fail to capture it, you are refusing free thrust. That is not caution. That is negligence. I want you to think of employer matching the right way. Most people treat it like a nice perk. It is more than that. It is an immediate return on action. A gift wrapped inside discipline. If someone is willing to add money to your ownership cylinder because you agreed to route part of your paycheck correctly, you should not need a motivational speech. You should need a pen. The Roth IRA and the 401k are not exciting because of branding. They are exciting because they make the machine more efficient. Efficiency matters. Wealth is not only about how hard you push. It is about how little energy is wasted between effort and retained ownership. That is why I care so much about taxes, fees, interest, and structure. Tiny leaks repeated for decades become giant missing fortunes. Now, I am aware that many people hear words like retirement account and their eyes glaze over. They think this is the boring part. This is the powerful part. Boring is beautiful when boring compounds. You do not need financial entertainment. You need durable machinery. That is why simple diversified index funds and broad ETFs are so useful for so many people. They are not built to satisfy your ego. They are built to quietly harness the earnings power of large groups of productive businesses. People want a thrilling answer because thrilling answers make them feel early, special, superior, chosen. Most fortunes are not built by feeling chosen. They are built by obeying a rational system long enough for time to become a business partner. Time is not neutral. Time amplifies structure. Good structure turns time into a tailwind. Bad structure turns time into a sentence. If you invest $100 a month for decades, the miracle is not the $100. The miracle is what a disciplined machine and enough time do together. Compounding is the closest thing finance has to gravity, except most people experience it backward. Debt compounds against them. Lifestyle inflation compounds against them. Bad choices compound against them, fees compound against them, delay compounds against them. Then they assume compounding does not work. Compounding works perfectly. It simply obeys direction. If your machine is pointed toward ownership, compounding becomes an ally. If your machine is pointed toward appetite, compounding becomes an executioner. That is why I am harsh about sequence. First control the burn chamber, then build the shock absorber, then feed the ownership cylinder relentlessly. If you reverse the order, you create distortion. People try to invest while their lifestyle is eating them alive. They try to chase returns while one emergency would force them to liquidate. They try to look sophisticated while they are still structurally fragile. That is like bolting a race car spoiler onto an engine with no oil. You do not need performance before durability. You need durability so performance has a chance to matter. Let me say something else that people resist. You do not get rich by worshiping income. You get rich by directing income. There are people who earn modest amounts and steadily become strong because their machine is obedient. There are people who earn impressive amounts and remain trapped because their machine is undisciplined. The machine always wins. Income is a vote. Structure counts the ballots. This is also why I dislike moralistic money advice that tells people simply to cut all pleasure. A machine built on punishment rarely lasts. You are not trying to become a financial martyr. You are trying to become durable. The point of the 75% ceiling is not misery. It is controlled combustion. The point of the 10% cushion is not fear. It is structural stability. The point of the 15% ownership rule is not abstract virtue. It is the transfer of dependence into power. When you understand that, everything changes. You stop asking whether you deserve a purchase and start asking what chamber it belongs to. You stop confusing cash in the bank with true wealth and start distinguishing stability money from ownership money. You stop seeing investing as an optional hobby for experts and start seeing it as the ownership cylinder your future depends on. You stop admiring appearances and start measuring engines. This changes who impresses you. A person with a flashy car and no reserves becomes less impressive. A person with a modest life, a full cushion fund, and disciplined automatic investing becomes more impressive. A person bragging about stock tips becomes less impressive. A person who has spent 10 years feeding a simple, efficient ownership machine becomes more impressive. Noise loses status. Silence gains status. That is one of the most profitable psychological reversals you can make. I also want to talk about the danger of income expansion without machine discipline. When people earn more, they often feel relieved for a short time. Then the machine adapts, the apartment expands, the subscriptions multiply, the restaurant budget rises, the travel identity thickens, the gifting expectations inflate, the children's status environment becomes more expensive. The car shifts from tool to costume. Now they are back where they started, only in a nicer prison. That is why more income often fails to create more peace. The machine consumed the raise before freedom had a chance to touch it. I call that the comfort trap. The comfort trap is not that comfort exists. It is that people keep buying recurring comfort with permanent fixed costs. A one-time pleasure is one thing. A recurring lifestyle commitment is another. Fixed costs are dangerous because they keep showing up with legal confidence. If your machine is overloaded with fixed costs, then every future income decision is made under pressure. Pressure makes people obedient. Obedient people are easy to overwork. Overworked people are easy to sell convenience to. Convenience turns into more spending. More spending demands more work. More work creates more exhaustion. More exhaustion creates more emotional spending. That is a loop, not a life. The engine I want for you breaks that loop. The burn chamber is capped, which prevents appetite from controlling strategy. The shock absorber is full, which prevents chaos from hijacking judgment. The ownership cylinder is automatic, which prevents procrastination from stealing the future. That is how an adult machine is built. And let me make one more distinction that can save you years. Cheap is not always efficient. Expensive is not always wasteful. You have to think in terms of total machine effect. If paying more for something reduces repeated friction, preserves time, protects health, or increases income durability, that can be efficient. If paying less creates repeated repair, stress, time waste, distraction, or reputation damage, that can be expensive. This is why blanket rules are for amateurs. The real question is whether a purchase increases long-term control. A decent mattress that protects sleep may improve your machine. Reliable transportation that preserves work and peace may improve your machine. A course that genuinely sharpens a valuable skill may improve your machine. Professional clothing necessary for a role that multiplies earnings may improve your machine, but luxury purchased to soothe insecurity weakens the machine, even when the buyer calls it self-expression. Your machine does not care about the story you tell your friends. It only cares about the consequences it has to carry. A disciplined life looks restrictive to people who worship appetite. It looks liberating to people who understand systems. What you are really doing with a 75-10-15 structure is deciding that every dollar must pass an intelligence test before it is allowed to settle anywhere. Can this dollar be burned without overheating the system? Does this dollar belong in the shock absorber because fragility is still too high? Should this dollar be sent into ownership where it can begin hiring time, tax efficiency, and future optionality? That is the test. You may notice something powerful about this approach. It works at almost any income level. If you earn $10,000, the structure matters. If you earn $100,000, the structure matters. If you earn $1 million, the structure matters. In fact, the higher the income, the more dangerous the absence of structure becomes, because the machine can now destroy wealth at industrial scale. A sloppy low-income machine creates stress. A sloppy high-income machine creates tragedy. I have watched people accumulate enough income to become free and then spend with such unconsciousness that they remain servants in custom-tailored clothing. This is why I do not respect earnings by themselves. I respect retained strength. Retained strength is the part of income that survives your appetites, survives emergencies, survives taxes, survives noise, and enters assets. That is the only part that can eventually replace labor. And replacing labor, at least partially, is the point. Not because work is evil, not because ambition is evil, because dependence is expensive. When you are completely dependent on next month's paycheck, other people own too much of your emotional weather. The boss owns some of it, the company owns some of it, the market owns some of it, a surprise bill owns some of it, a medical issue owns some of it, a slowdown owns some of it, a layoff rumor owns some of it. That is too much external ownership over your internal life. A strong machine slowly buys that ownership back. That is what wealth really feels like. It feels like less panic. It feels like slower decisions. It feels like the ability to walk away. It feels like the quiet confidence that one setback is not a referendum on your survival. It feels like choosing for value rather than grasping for status. It feels like waking up and realizing you are no longer one bad month away from humiliation. Do not underestimate how life-changing that is. A lot of people chase visible luxury because they have never tasted invisible strength. If they ever felt the peace of reserves, the dignity of low fixed costs, and the momentum of automatic ownership, many of their former cravings would lose power. That is another hidden benefit of a better machine. The better it runs, the less impressed you become by nonsense. You become harder to manipulate. That matters because modern life is one giant competition for your attention, your insecurity, and your paycheck. Every business wants a piece of your burn chamber. Many want you emotionally dysregulated enough to surrender without thinking. A chaotic person is easier to sell to. A disciplined person is harder to extract from. That means this is not only a money system, it is a defense system. When your burn rate is capped, advertising loses some power. When your cushion fund is real, fear loses some power. When your ownership cylinder is automatic, delay loses some power. You become less available for extraction. That is one of the cleanest definitions of financial maturity I know. Not knowing every market forecast, not reciting clever jargon, not pretending to be a stock genius. Financial maturity is becoming structurally difficult to exploit. Now, let me go one layer deeper on investing, because many people still hesitate here. They think investing is where the complexity begins. For most people, investing becomes dangerous precisely when they try to make it complicated. Complexity flatters the ego. Simplicity serves the future. A diversified, low-cost approach through broad index exposure is powerful because it keeps the machine moving without requiring constant heroic judgment. It lets you participate in the productive output of businesses over long periods without making every month a referendum on your intelligence. That matters because people sabotage themselves when money becomes a stage for proving brilliance. You do not need brilliance. You need endurance. You do not need prediction. You need participation in productive systems. You do not need constant action. You need consistent direction. This is why the ownership cylinder should be fed automatically whenever possible. Automation is one of the best antidotes to human drama. Humans get excited, humans get scared, humans delay, humans rationalize, humans perform. Automation does not perform, it obeys. That is why automatic contributions into retirement and investment accounts are so useful. They move the future from intention into execution. Most failed financial plans do not fail because the math was wrong. They fail because the execution depended on mood. Mood is not a plan. Desire is not a plan. Motivation is not a plan. A machine is a plan. Once you understand that, you stop trying to become a better mood and start trying to build a better structure. That is much more reliable. I also want to warn you about confusing net worth theater with actual financial power. Some people look rich because spending is visible. Ownership is often invisible. Some people feel poor because they have not yet learned to enjoy invisible gains. That is a dangerous blindness. The car parked outside tells you very little. The reserve account tells you more. The retirement contributions tell you more. The low burn rate tells you more. The absence of high interest debt tells you more. The quiet accumulation of broad productive assets tells you more. The person who can live well below their means without feeling diminished is often far stronger than the person who needs external confirmation to justify internal anxiety. That strength compounds too. It compounds into better negotiations because desperation is lower. It compounds into better relationships because money stress is lower. It compounds into better health. Because constant financial panic is corrosive. It compounds into better career choices because you can take the role with better long-term value instead of the one that merely throws off immediate cash to feed an overbuilt lifestyle. Everything touches everything. That is the point. A money machine is never just about money. It shapes where you live, what work you tolerate, how fast you age, how often you panic, how easily you are manipulated, and how much of your life belongs to you. That is why I am not interested in cute advice. I am interested in durable structure. 75% for living at most, 10% to build the shock absorber until you have about 5 months of essential expenses, 15% minimum toward ownership. Tax-advantaged vehicles when available, and broad productive assets that can compound. If you can do better than that, do better. If you cannot do it perfectly on day one, begin anyway. But do not negotiate with the architecture, because if you do, life will negotiate with you in much harsher terms. It will negotiate through stress. It will negotiate through debt. It will negotiate through delay. It will negotiate through weak choices made under pressure. I would rather have you face discipline voluntarily than face consequences involuntarily. That is the real choice in front of you. Not rich versus poor, not luxury versus sacrifice, not coffee versus no coffee. The real choice is between running a machine that converts income into control or running a machine that converts income into dependence. One machine gets smoother, calmer, stronger, and more independent over time. The other machine gets noisier, hotter, more fragile, and more demanding over time. Both machines can exist at the same salary. Both machines can exist in the same city. Both machines can exist in the same neighborhood, even on the same street. What separates them is not luck first. It is allocation. You do not rise to wealth because you wished correctly. You rise because each dollar is sent to the right chamber often enough that time can no longer ignore you. That is how ordinary people create extraordinary stability. That is how modest incomes become stronger than flashy incomes. That is how labor begins to hire ownership. That is how panic starts losing ground. And that is how one day you look up and realize the engine under your life is no longer trying to consume you. It is finally carrying you. Now test yourself honestly. If more money arrived in your life next month, would your machine become stronger, or would your appetites just get a bigger budget? If a hard surprise hit you in the next 90 days, do you have a shock absorber, or would chaos take the wheel? If you stopped working for 6 months, do you own anything that would keep paying you? Or are you still relying on motion to imitate progress? Those are not academic questions. They are the gates between adulthood and drift. You can keep feeding a machine that burns your future for heat today, or you can rebuild the engine now, chamber by chamber, until every dollar serves a purpose larger than this week. Relief, that is the threshold. Cross it. And your money starts obeying you. Ignore it, and no paycheck on earth will be large enough to save you from your own machine.